Emily had always been the type of person who believed in signs, and meeting Ryan felt like one. It started online. A simple friend request from a man in Vancouver who shared her love for hiking and photography. Ryan had an easy charm, the kind that made you forget to be careful. Their nightly video calls turned into long-distance visits, and soon it felt like fate. He would tell her stories about the life he was building. A quiet cabin near the mountains, surrounded by lakes and wildlife. "It's peaceful here," he'd say. "No noise, no crowds, just the sound of wind in the trees." For Emily, who was tired of hospital shifts and city chaos, that sounded like heaven. When he finally asked her to come live with him, she didn't hesitate. It felt right, almost too right. The journey to Vancouver was like a dream. She remembered crossing the border, her car packed with everything she owned. A few boxes, a suitcase, and a heart full of hope. Ryan had texted her the coordinates instead of an address, saying the cabin was off the grid. That didn't bother her at first. She thought it was part of his adventurous charm. The further she drove, the thinner the roads became, until pavement turned to gravel and city lights vanished completely. She could see snow collecting on the treetops, hear the whisper of the wind through endless pine. By the time she finally reached the clearing, she was exhausted but smiling. She expected a warm cabin, maybe a fire waiting for her. Instead, Ryan stood there with that same calm grin, waving from the porch of a small, dark wooden structure that looked far older than he'd described. Inside, the cabin was cold, too cold, and strangely empty. There were no signs of another life there, no clothes, no photos, no signs of the home he said he'd been preparing. When she asked about it, Ryan brushed it off with a laugh. "I wanted you to decorate it yourself," he said. "Make it yours." She smiled, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling crawling up her spine. Maybe he just wanted to start fresh together, she told herself. But that night, as she lay awake, listening to the wind scrape against the windows, Emily couldn't shake the thought that something about this place and about Ryan wasn't what it seemed. The first few days in the cabin felt strange, but Emily tried to convince herself it was all part of adjusting to a new life. The forest was breathtakingly beautiful. Tall evergreens stood like guardians around the cabin, and a frozen lake shimmered in the distance. During the day, Ryan was kind and attentive, chopping wood, cooking meals, and showing her trails that wound deep into the trees. But once the sun dipped below the horizon, his behavior began to change. He'd become quiet, distracted, almost like someone else entirely. Sometimes he'd sit by the window, staring into the dark woods for hours without saying a word. When she'd ask what he was looking at, he'd only say, "You'll understand soon." There was something in his tone, calm but distant, that made her shiver. By the end of the first week, Emily started noticing how silent everything was. There were no birds, no rustling animals, just a constant stillness, thick and unnatural. At night, that silence turned heavy, pressing against the cabin walls. Then the noises began. At first, it sounded like soft footsteps circling the cabin, slow and deliberate, stopping whenever she tried to listen closely. Once, she thought she heard whispering. Faint, broken voices calling her name from the edge of the woods. She told Ryan about it, expecting him to laugh it off, but he didn't. Instead, his expression darkened. He told her never to open the door after sunset. "The forest changes at night," he whispered. "You don't want to see what walks through it." After that, Emily could barely sleep. Every night, Ryan would take his flashlight and disappear outside, sometimes for hours. She'd lie awake listening to the crunch of his boots fade into the distance, wondering what he was doing in the freezing dark. When he returned, his clothes were always damp and his hands ice cold, trembling slightly, as if he'd been digging in the snow. One night, when she asked him where he'd gone, he gave her a strange smile and said, checking the perimeter, "We're not alone out here." The words echoed in her mind long after he fell asleep beside her. And as she stared at the ceiling, listening to the faint whisper of the wind, Emily realized something terrifying. She didn't know who she was really living with anymore. It was late afternoon when Emily first noticed the trapdoor. The snow outside had been falling for days, burying the world in white silence. And Ryan had gone out again, saying he needed to check the line. Left alone in the dim light of the cabin, Emily wandered restlessly. That's when she tripped over the corner of an old rug near the fireplace. As she adjusted it, her fingers brushed against cold metal. She pulled the rug back and froze. There was a small rusted latch embedded in the floorboards. Her pulse quickened. Ryan had never mentioned a basement. The wood around the handle looked newer, like it had been replaced recently. She crouched there for a long time, debating whether to open it, but curiosity and fear battled inside her until curiosity finally won. She searched Ryan's jacket, the one he always wore when he went outside, and in its pocket, she found a small brass key. The moment the lock clicked open, a smell drifted up, thick, damp, and metallic, like rust and decay. She hesitated, covering her nose, then slowly lifted the wooden hatch. A narrow staircase led into darkness, so deep it seemed to swallow the light. Grabbing a candle from the table, she descended one step at a time, her heart thudding like a drum. The air grew colder as she went down, and the flickering flame revealed something she hadn't expected: shelves filled with old, water-stained boxes, glass jars, and what looked like film canisters. On the far wall, a workbench was covered in photographs, dozens of them, pinned and curling at the edges. As she stepped closer, her hand trembled. Each picture showed a different woman standing in front of the same cabin, smiling beside Ryan. Their faces were happy, unaware. Beneath each photo, written in neat black marker, was a single word and a date. The word was always the same: gone. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Her fingers grazed over the last few photographs. Women she didn't recognize, yet something about them felt hauntingly familiar. The hairstyles, the clothes, the way they all stood in the same spot by the same tree. She flipped through the stack until she reached the last photo. Her stomach dropped. It was a blank frame, empty, but labeled in the same handwriting: Emily soon. The candle flickered violently as she stumbled back, her heartbeat roaring in her ears. Every sound in the cabin above suddenly felt sharper: the creak of wood, the faint whistle of wind, the echo of footsteps. Or was that her imagination? Panic took over as she blew out the candle and scrambled up the stairs, slamming the hatch shut just as she heard something, or someone, move outside the cabin. She didn't know if it was Ryan or one of the gone women coming back to warn her. Emily didn't wait to think. Instinct took over. She grabbed her coat, her phone, and bolted out into the snow. The air outside was sharp and freezing, biting her face as she ran. The forest loomed around her like a black wall, and with every step, her boots sank deeper into the drifts. The only sound was her ragged breathing, until behind her, a door creaked open. She froze. Ryan's voice drifted through the cold air, calm and terrifyingly casual. "Emily, what did you see down there?" She didn't answer. She ran harder, branches slashing at her arms, snow blinding her eyes. Her phone had no signal, and every direction looked the same, endless, suffocating white. Somewhere behind her, she heard the crunch of footsteps growing louder. He wasn't shouting anymore. He was humming. The same low, tuneless hum he used when cooking breakfast, only now it echoed through the forest like a warning. She stumbled onto a narrow trail winding between tall pines. The sky was darkening fast. Twilight in the mountains didn't last long. She kept running until her legs burned, then ducked behind a fallen log to catch her breath. For a moment, everything went silent again, the world frozen, holding its breath with her. Then, faintly, she saw light flickering through the trees, the beam of Ryan's flashlight sweeping across the snow. "You weren't supposed to go down there." "Em," he called softly. "You don't understand. They were chosen, just like you." The sound of his voice made her stomach twist. She pressed a hand over her mouth, forcing herself not to make a sound. But her heart was pounding so hard, she was sure he could hear it. The flashlight beam passed inches from her hiding spot, then moved on. She exhaled silently, waiting for the chance to move again. But then came a sound that turned her blood cold, the click of a camera shutter. Somewhere close, too close. Emily shot up and ran again, tears freezing on her cheeks. The mountain path curved upward, slick with ice and branches, but she didn't dare slow down. She could hear him behind her now, closer, his boots crunching in rhythm with her gasping breaths. "You came all this way for me," he called out, his voice rising above the wind. "You said you'd never leave me, remember?" She glanced back and saw him, just a shadow at first, then his face illuminated by the flashlight, twisted in something between anger and amusement. In his right hand, he held something metallic, a knife glinting in the moonlight. The trees began to thin, revealing a steep ridge ahead. She didn't think, she just ran for it. The snow beneath her feet, crumbling toward a cliff's edge. Behind her, Ryan's footsteps grew faster, louder, until they were nearly beside her. The cold air filled with the sound of her scream, and then, suddenly, silence. 2 days later, the mountains were quiet again, unnaturally quiet. A group of hikers trekking through the northern ridge spotted black smoke curling into the pale sky. When they followed it, they found what was left of the cabin, or what used to be one. The place was nothing but ash and half, melted beams, still hissing from the cold snow hitting the embers. The police were called, and soon the forest buzzed with flashing lights and quiet, uneasy murmurs. Investigators combed through the wreckage, trying to make sense of it. The fire had started from the basement, they said, though no clear source was found. Among the ashes, they discovered something strange, a partially melted camera, its film blackened, but not entirely destroyed. When the photos were developed, they revealed fragments of faces, women's smiles frozen mid-laughter, and in the final few frames, the faint outline of Emily, standing near the cabin, looking straight at the lens, her eyes wide, as if she'd seen something she couldn't escape. Ryan was nowhere to be found. The snow around the site was disturbed, but there were no footprints leading away from the wreck, only deep, uneven indentations that seemed to stop abruptly at the tree line. The RCMP searched for weeks, bringing in dogs, drones, even thermal scanners, but nothing. It was as if he'd vanished into the mountain itself. Locals whispered about him, about how they'd seen a man matching his description, wandering the forest months before the fire, carrying a camera and muttering to himself. Some claimed they'd heard crying from the woods at night. Others said Ryan had always been obsessed with the women he met, that he'd lure them up there, one by one, and that none of them had ever made it back down. But none of it could be proven. There were no bodies, no tracks, no answers. Just an endless forest, swallowing every secret it was fed. Weeks later, when the snow began to melt, a park ranger found something wedged between two rocks near the frozen creek. A single boot, stiff with ice. Inside was a piece of torn fabric with faded stitching E.H. Emily's initials. The case was reopened, but even then, every lead ended the same way: silence. Some believed Emily had set the fire herself and disappeared into the wilderness to escape him. Others said Ryan was still alive, watching from somewhere deep in those woods, waiting for his next perfect photograph. And then there were the stories, the ones no one could explain. Hikers claiming they'd heard a woman's voice crying for help in the distance, only for it to fade the moment they called back. Or the occasional sighting of a figure in white standing on the ridge at dusk, just watching. No one knows who it is. No one stays long enough to find out. They say love makes people do crazy things, but for Emily, love led her straight into a nightmare hidden beneath the snow. Maybe she ran, maybe she fought back, or maybe the mountains took her the same way they took the others. To this day, no one knows what truly happened that night in Vancouver's frozen woods. But if you ever find yourself hiking through those mountains and you hear someone whisper your name from the dark, don't answer. Because some voices, they say, belong to those who never left.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.